I think I've made it clear on several occasions that Shadow of the Colossus is one of my favorite games ever, and there really hasn't been another game like it. The closest I can think of is the Titan bosses from Castlevania Lords of Shadow, but one day there was this game I stumbled on a trailer for years ago called Praey for the Gods. At the time, Praey was spelled P-R-E-Y, but somebody got mad at that and decided that title was a little too similar to a game of theirs. But this game was definitely scratching that itch, just going off the trailer alone, so I wishlisted it on Steam the second that trailer dropped, and I waited for it to come out of early access. But when it came out, I played a good portion of it, and then I just stopped for some reason, and I'm not really sure why. I don't know why I have this thing sometimes where I'll play a game and then not play it, then come back months later and play through the whole thing and then really enjoy it. I don't know what's up with that. But after upgrading the computer, I decided to come back to it and beat it. I don't see too many people talking about this game, and I wanted to try video game reviews again. So let's take a look at Praey for the Gods with the help of these two idiots, Jeff and Todd. Yo. Hi. We'll warn you guys when we get into spoiler talk, and we also gonna talk about the story and stuff. But until we get to the spoiler section, we're gonna limit background footage to only the first 3 bosses, in case you are interested in trying this game and you don't want everything spoiled. Alright, let's do this. Do you like sci-fi? Do you like superhero teams? Well, you might want to check out my book, Renegades Volume 1 Rise, now available on Amazon, both physical and digital. Set in the far future, humanity accidentally crossed over into another dimension while trying to escape a dying Earth. They arrived at a mirror Earth called Terra, inhabited by sentient humanoid animals called Terrans. Humans and Terrans coexisted for a little while, but they eventually went to war. After 10 years of brutal warfare, they eventually found peace. Our story is set 50 years later. A madman named Ivan and his terror cell called Scythe are searching for a dangerous weapon that will allow them to take over the world. The only people who can stop them are the Renegades, a ragtag group of misfits including a teenage girl trained to be a soldier since she was a child, a teenage delinquent with a hoverboard, 2 super geniuses, a former heavyweight pro boxer with cybernetic augments, and a mysterious blue creature with no memories and the ability to manipulate water and ice. In order to stop Ivan, the Renegades will have to take on giant mechs, evil mega corporations, terrorists, cyborg ninjas, and more in their exciting debut. You can pick up the digital version for 99 cents or the print version for 17 bucks. You can also read the book for free as serials on my Wattpad and Minds accounts. They are updated every other week with a new section. So as I said in the intro, this game is very similar to Shadow of the Colossus. There are giant monsters that you have to hunt down and kill that are more like solving a puzzle that can kill you if you get it wrong. There are 8 monsters, or gods as the game calls them, and each one is pretty unique to one another in both look and how you fight them. But here's where the game differs from Shadow of the Colossus. There are survival mechanics. Because you are in the polar region of whatever world this takes place in, and you're not a talking penguin, you've got to deal with the cold, and it can kill you on higher difficulties. There's a heat meter where if it runs out, you will start taking damage from the cold every few seconds until you either get near a fire, get inside, or die on higher difficulties. Although on normal, you do have a portion of your health that will regen, so the cold won't kill you. Also, depending on what difficulty, you might only have to worry about the cold when there's an actual storm. But the regen only kicks in when your health is really low, and given how much damage some of the gods can dish out, you really don't want to be on low health in a fight. Keeping warm isn't the only thing you gotta worry about though. You gotta eat too. Running across icy landscapes and scaling 2-story monsters works up quite the appetite. Eating food can also restore your health. There's a few ways to do it. You can kill and hunt rabbits, boar, fish, and stags, and birds. Why would you kill the birds, you fucking monsters? And you can eat them, either raw or cooked. I think you get less health from eating raw meat, but there's no penalty for liking tartare. At least not on normal. You can also go the vegan route and eat berries and bread if you want. You can find the bread in crates around the world. It is harder to keep yourself fed if you are doing that, but you can. Thankfully, failing to eat on normal difficulty won't kill you, but it will affect the rate your stamina regens. But on other difficulties, it can do a lot more than that. You also have to worry about exhaustion. If you get too tired, it'll just make things harder for you. And what would a survival game be without crafting? There's a crafting system. You can craft new items, repair your weapons and other equipment, upgrade certain gear including your clothes, and also make campfires, which is a good way to avoid freezing to death. Your weapons and the grapple hook will decay as you use them, and you gotta get resources to repair those. I gotta say, I hate gear degradation in games. I do not like it, especially if the degradation happens really fast. Thankfully in this game it's not too terrible unless you're fighting a very specific thing, which we'll get into that later. But fortunately, if this shit annoys you, you can just turn it off in the options menu. Another way this game differs from Shadow of the Colossus is the world. It isn't quite as empty as Shadow of the Colossus. You see, there are enemies outside of the bosses. You've got undead warriors, these weird worm things that will spit projectiles at you, and wraiths that will fly through you to damage you. Enemy encounters aren't super common, and most of the time they can just be avoided, and I tend to avoid them. But enemies drop crafting materials that will help you out, so killing them is sometimes worth it, even if it means putting up with the game's shoddy combat system. The game emphasizes exploration, and not just to get to where the next god is. There are totems scattered across the map, and you'll want to collect them because every 3 totems you get allow you to upgrade either your health or your stamina. You get to pick. Sometimes it's just hidden in the environment, sometimes it's a puzzle you have to solve first. Some of these puzzles are more obvious than others. You'll want to find these upgrades, and you also want to upgrade some of your gear because some of these fights can be really annoying without upgrades. There's also notes that can give you some clues as to what's going on and hints on how to fight some of the gods. Speaking of that, let's get into the bosses. Like Shadow of the Colossus, the way you fight the gods is climbing on parts of their body and finding weak spots and then exploiting them. Each god is a puzzle, and you have to figure out how to climb on their body and then attack their weak spots. In this case, they're pistons, and each piston has 3 levels you need to charge up by holding and releasing the attack button while standing over them. You can basically think of this like stabbing, charging up your stabs on the markers on the Colossi and Shadow of the Colossus. It's functionally the same. Once all the pistons are charged, the god will die and the battle ends. Each one has a different arena and a different approach to defeating them. You find them by following a giant pillar of light in the sky, and now that I'm thinking about it, that was also an early idea of how you'd find the next boss in Shadow of the Colossus, so that's kind of neat. If there is one way the art direction distances itself from Shadow of the Colossus, it's the look of these things. They feature a lot of exposed skulls and bones, and it seems like there was more of an emphasis on making them look frightening, or something that you'd be more afraid of. Although some of the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus were pretty intimidating to look at too. One thing that I do like that I discovered on accident is that you can fight some of the bosses out of order. The game will point you to the boss that you're supposed to fight, but you can completely ignore that waypoint and go to another arena instead if you know where it is. And some of the bosses have more than one way you can beat them, which is pretty neat, and it does make replaying some of the fights a bit more interesting. Most of the fights are enjoyable, and some of them introduce a new mechanic during the fight to try and mix things up. Sadly though, this game does have some gameplay issues. Jumping feels really inconsistent. There are times where I couldn't get her to jump over things I felt like she should be able to jump over. Sometimes trying to jump and grab onto something like a piece of fur will just not work, and sometimes it will. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Combat against normal enemies is not fun and feels very rough. Your attack animations feel slow and they're not satisfying. And I don't know, this combat system just doesn't feel very good. Also, enemies can sometimes slide around the world in mid-attack or mid-wind-up for an attack, and it just looks very odd and strange. In general, your character just feels very slippery during tense situations, which led to frustration, especially during some of the later boss fights, which we will get into that. Early in the game, your stamina feels like it drains way too fast, and this is because using the parachute, which you use to get around and save you from death when you fall off one of these things, drains your stamina. Also, running drains your stamina. And obviously climbing and holding onto these things does that too. So there's a lot of things that rely on your stamina. And there are times where you will have to use the parachute to reach a boss, or you'll have to run towards the boss before something happens so you can climb onto them. And you'll end up in situations where you won't have the stamina to get to a rest spot, or the boss will just immediately start shaking and then you can't do anything and you run out of stamina before you can get anywhere. Climbing in general can feel off at times, and sometimes it's not clear what you can and can't climb on. Sometimes you can climb rocks, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you won't grab onto a ledge or objects as you're falling, even if you are holding down the button to grab things. Equally annoying, your character also has this tendency to slide off objects that you should be able to stand on, but the game just decides, no you can't. Alright, so it wasn't just me. I thought it was because I was high as shit. No, that happened to me too. The other thing is sometimes it's hard to see where the weak spots are, and there isn't an easy way to reveal them before you climb onto the enemy. And there was one instant late in the game where I dead ass had to look up where the final piston was because it was not clear what to do. The optional mini bosses called champions pretty much highlight everything I dislike about the way combat works in this game. They have telegraphed attacks, which is fine, which is good, but they will do this like slide shit like the floor is made of butter or something before an attack, and it looks really weird. Also, the hitboxes during these attacks are really fucking questionable. Like, they're way wider than the actual character model sometimes, and I was sitting there going, how the fuck did that hit me? And if you try to fight the champions the obvious way, which is hitting their legs until they fall over so you can then climb up on their back and hit the piston, you're gonna be sitting there wailing on their legs for a good while. I've had weapons decay from how much I was hitting them. So if you go into one of those fights, you better have more than one weapon, or several, and you have to do this at least 3 times before they die. So it ends up being really tedious. The other way, which is probably the faster way to do this, is to lure them towards the walls in the arena, then scale the walls, and then jump onto their back that way. I've never done this, but I have seen people do it. I'm just glad that these things are optional, and they do drop good weapons and a bunch of materials, so there is some reward for putting up with it, but it's just not fun. And to add insult to injury, there always seems to be a blizzard. Drains your heat every time you want to fight one of these things, at least every time I did. I don't know if that's scripted or what, but it really did feel like it. And that's another thing while I'm on that subject. The survival mechanics, they can just feel kind of annoying after a while, and it can make exploring feel like a drag, which is a shame. Fortunately, there is an option to turn off most of them, or you can make it harder if you really like that kind of stuff, which I do think is smart, because I think at launch there wasn't an option to toggle this stuff on and off, but they later added that, and I think that was a smart move. And you can do this at any point in the pause menu too, which is nice. But I'm gonna let Todd talk about the technical stuff with the PC version, since that's what we played. Okay, the game runs pretty good. Granted, with a 3080, most things run well. We can easily get 140 plus frames when playing. Graphically, the game looks alright. There are some off-looking animations here or there, mostly the combat animations, but I do have to bring this up. This game was mostly made by 3 people, and when you put that into perspective, it's pretty impressive, actually. That being said, I did notice some visual bugs with the grass, where sometimes its movements will glitch out and it just looks really off sometimes. I'm not sure what triggers it. Also, during the fight with the 5th boss, we started seeing an odd visual glitch with the pistons. Not a big deal, but it was a bit distracting. During the last few bosses, there was also this odd audio popping noise that happened a few times. But I suspect that was due to a software update for our headset, because it was not doing that before that point and before that update. So that one I don't think I can blame on the game. But overall, it runs well. I didn't have any game-breaking bugs or anything. I like some of the details they added too. Like, not only do your footsteps leave imprints in the snow, but so does your weapon or any object you're holding that's touching the snow. I don't know how well it runs on consoles, but as far as the PC version goes, it runs fine. I'm gonna pass this off to Jeff. He wants to talk about music.
Alright, if there's one thing Shadow of the Colossus did really well, it's that goddamn music, bruh. This is one of those soundtracks where I listen to the entire thing. I don't skip over certain songs. All of that music is memorable. Now, I got my favorites I'll replay a bit, but in general, when I listen to the soundtrack, I'm listening to the whole thing. I could hum some of them songs if I really wanted to right now. Please don't. Alright, but I wish I could say the same about this game's soundtrack. Now, I'm gonna say this right now. The soundtrack is not bad. It's actually alright. Like, the music outside of boss fights, I think is really good. It's got this like choir singing, usually with the scenes involving the temples and stuff, and it reminds me a little bit of Halo. Just a little bit. I'll play some examples. Maybe it's just me. Yeah, there's not that much music, and it usually plays during combat with enemies or bosses and stuff, and in cutscenes, so it's doing the thing that Shadow of the Colossus did. I wish I could say the boss music was memorable though. Again, it's not bad, it just doesn't stand out all that much. I will say the music here sounds like it's trying to make you feel scared or afraid or uneasy when fighting these bosses, because there's a lot of weird string sounds that wouldn't feel out of place in a horror movie. I'll play some examples. I think it's a good soundtrack, and it wouldn't feel out of place in a fantasy movie. I appreciate it more listening to it outside the game. I did buy this on Steam, so I was listening to it outside of it. While writing this, we were listening to it. But my biggest problem with the soundtrack is that it's not particularly memorable, and a lot of the boss themes really feel the same. Like, they all have the same tone, and they seem to be using the same instruments or very similar sounding instruments in similar ways to other songs, which makes it really hard to differentiate them. Like, I bet if I didn't put the names there, you might have thought those were all the same song, and it feels kind of weird. Like, going back to Shadow of the Colossus for a second, they had creepier, suspenseful music that was a lot slower and just meant to get under your skin or be intense. And then you had the more like amped up music, especially when you solve the puzzle to get on the Colossus. Usually the music would get more amped and more hype. Or when you're trying to figure out how to get on the Colossus or figure out the puzzle, the music is way more intense to make you feel intimidated by what you're dealing with. It had range is what I'm trying to say. But this soundtrack is just scary boss music and cool soothing choir music that feels otherworldly and shit. And the tracks that are in the same camp with each other, they really kind of sound too similar. But despite all that, I don't think it's a bad soundtrack. I think it's good. It gets the job done. And when you're in the middle of figuring out how you're supposed to kill one of these motherfuckers, you ain't paying attention to the music.
You know, this music would be pretty cool as background music during a D&D session or some other tabletop game when the party is fighting the antagonist or a big monster or something. You would say that, you fucking nerd. Alright, we about to talk spoilers, mostly some of the bosses and what we liked and disliked about them. And we're gonna try to make sense of the vague plot here. I make no promises on that. So skip to the time on screen if you want to avoid all that and get into the wrap-up section. Alright, I think they're gone. We can talk about this now. So, we're each gonna pick our favorite and least favorite bosses and talk about them for a little bit. I'm gonna start since it's my channel anyway, fuck it. My least favorite is the 5th boss, Edgy. And he's technically the 5th boss, but I fought him out of order by accident, so he ended up being the 4th boss, which maybe is probably why I don't like this fight that much. Edgy looks cool, but he has 2 big issues that cropped up in later fights also. You see, when a guy tries to shake you off, you gotta mash a button or else you fall off, but this mashing also drains your stamina. And Edgy really likes to do this, and there's not a lot of rest spots on him, so you tend to fall off pretty quickly after climbing on. Edgy has 2 methods for getting to his weak spots. You can either shoot him in the eye with an arrow, which is really hard to do, especially if you don't have an explosive arrow, or you can bait him into the deeper snow and climb up his arm or leg depending on what attack he does. This is the strategy I tried for most of the fight, but the issue is, you don't have a lot of time to get on his arm or his leg, and the hitbox when he does the fist slam is wide, and it's wider than you think, so you're likely to get hit by it, and if you do get hit, which you probably will, you won't have time to run up his arm and latch onto it before he pulls his arm free, which is really annoying, because sometimes it's really hard to get him to do the attack. And I mentioned this earlier, but he shakes a lot, and there were points where I barely had enough stamina to get 1 or 2 attacks in on the pistons on his arm before he would just fall, before I just fall off and to do it all over again. Not only that, but sometimes he would just completely ignore me and walk to the other side of the map and not do anything. Like when he first did it, I thought it was part of an attack, but no, he just forgot I existed. Yeah, this fight was annoying as shit. Somehow, I can't believe I did this either, because I normally suck with aiming. I managed to shoot him in the eye. So then I could get on his arms and get to the other weak points and then get to one on his head. Also, I have one other criticism about the grapple hook. They sometimes have grapple points on the gods that you can use to bypass some climbing or to get to areas you normally couldn't get to. They're usually not mandatory, but they usually lead to rest spots or just an easy way to not waste a bunch of stamina. The problem is you can't use the grapple hook while holding onto the boss. Like you can't just one-hand it and aim and fire. I don't fucking know why. I'm guessing it's a balancing reason. So you either have to be in free fall, which does give you about a split second to aim and shoot, but aiming is not the smoothest thing, honestly. Or you have to be standing on the boss somewhere and be, not falling off, which is not easy to do, especially when we're talking about Edgy and his arms, because you'll just slide right off him, even when he's not shaking. Yeah, I really didn't like this fight either. Figuring out what to do was the easy part, but it was just more of a headache than it really needed to be. But he's not the worst headache in the game. But, Edgy, what was your favorite? I really like the Drekki. It's a flying serpent and you have to power up this giant vent thing and then use the parachute to fly up to him. Then you gotta make your way across his body and hit these devices to shift the rings on his body around so you can keep moving forward and get to the other weak points. If you do fall off, the good news is you're probably gonna fall in the water, which on normal difficulty is perfectly fine even if you run out of stamina and it won't kill you. Yeah, this is actually pretty cool. I do like how you gotta run like hell and dodge his fireballs because he just comes down and just carpet bombs you. I like the arena, and it's easy to figure out what you're supposed to do since you are activating vents to reach the arena in the first place. Never felt stumped during this one. Who turn is it? Yours? Alright. Least favorite. Alright. The boar. It took me way too long to figure out what the hell you needed to do for this one. Yeah, that's because you're an idiot. You didn't figure it out either. Edgy sorta did. He figured out you needed to stand on the plate that lights up the wall behind you, but it takes a while for the board to charge into it, and he kept moving away from it, so we all kept thinking that we were doing something wrong, that we missed something, but we actually didn't. We just had to wait. Yeah, I don't know, that just felt weird. But the other thing is he has a weak spot on his chest, but you can only get to it after he's hit the wall and knocked himself out for 5 seconds. And when he gets up, you better let go because you will not have a chance to hit the piston. And if he steps on you at any point during that fight, you are dead. His other attacks are pretty boring though, and most of the fight is just sitting there waiting for him to charge you so you can dodge and get him to hit the wall. Yeah, Boar wasn't a fun fight, but what's your favorite? I really like the Satyr. Is that because he's the easiest in the game? No. I mean, yeah, a little bit. I also like the way he looks. Like, he looks really freaking cool. He's creepy as shit with that missing jaw and his stomach and all that. Ugh. Good way to start the game, too. I see why they use him a lot in marketing because appearance-wise, yeah, he looks awesome. The fight is pretty easy, but it feels like a pretty early Colossus fight in Shadow of the Colossus.
And it's a good tutorial fight too. It helps you figure out how the game works and all that stuff, so I think it's good. But what about you, Todd?
I really didn't like the Krogan, the bird one. Really? I thought that was gonna be someone's favorite.
Yeah, what made you put him as your least favorite?
Well, I think it has a cool look, and the main way you'd reach its weak spot is neat, since you gotta shoot a flaming arrow into his mouth before it spits fire at you and then it crashes into the snow. The problem is, it is way too easy to fall off, and since the parachute requires stamina and there's a lot of solid ground for his arena, I'd sometimes fall off from a height that I couldn't survive and just die and have to restart the entire fight. And that was the only part of the fight that really felt like a challenge, was just not falling off. And some of his weak spots can be really annoying to reach because he shakes constantly, especially the one on his chest. I spent way too much time trying to get to that one. And also, the novelty of the chain reaction with the fire arrow and him charging up his fire breath wears off after the third time you do it.
Yeah, I forgot about that, the falling thing, yeah. Maybe if that arena had some more water around it, like with Drakey, it wouldn't be that bad. I do like the boss, like the way it looks and stuff, but that part was annoying as shit. And it does bug me that the weak spot on the chest was just that annoying. But which was your favorite?
I really like the Devourer. It's interesting to have a mostly stationary boss be the second boss in the game. That was an interesting choice. Plus, the way you have to stun him so you can climb on him was neat, and I could see that being a little bit frustrating if you didn't find the note, but I figured it out without using it. Plus, it's a giant worm. Giant worms are cool most of the time. And the whole running for cover while circling an arena to get him to shoot the device was intense but fun.
It's weird that the Devourer is like a giant version of those small little worm enemies around the map. I'm not sure what that means lore-wise. I don't fucking know, man. That's you guys' department. But that just needs Thrall, right?
Thrall is the second to last boss, and man, do I fucking hate this thing.
Yeah, he fucking sucks. That was terrible. That was terrible. He looks awesome. I love the way he looks, but damn, that was annoying as shit.
Not an enjoyable fight, and some parts of it were just not clear at all as to what you were supposed to do. Before you get into this fight, the game introduces this mechanic with these magic fruit, I guess is what they are, that can be thrown as energy blasts to break certain objects that have this glowing effect on them. When you get to this boss and you see that he has the same materials covering parts of his body, you naturally think to use these plants against him, and you'd be right. Here's where this becomes a problem. There's this thing on his back that you have to smash the main part of, but even after you hit it, there's these two tower things on his back that are still there, and they have the same glowy material that lets you know that you can break them. So I thought you had to keep hitting them, and hitting those things is not easy at all, and it turns out I didn't need to do that at all. The other problem is, for some reason, the character kept fucking sliding off the platforms on his body, and she would just refuse to grab onto the fur when jumping. It's also stupidly easy to fall off of this boss's back, and the game won't let you grab things to break your fall either.
Oh, and don't forget those boulders he chucks at you that take almost all your health if he catches you with them.
Yeah, the damage he can do with these boulders if he catches you with them is disgusting, but the only thing that does make it at least a little bit bearable is they tend to miss you when you're using the explosive fruit, but it's not very consistent because sometimes he's caught me with it, even though 5 seconds ago he didn't, and he hasn't really moved all that much. Sliding off of parts of his body is sadly not the biggest problem this son of a bitch has. He has a piston that I could not for the life of me figure out where it was. I had no idea what I was missing, so it got so bad that I had to pause the game and go look that shit up. What you had to do is get him to fire lasers at the armor on his arm. How you were supposed to figure that out without looking it up, I don't freaking know, because there is zero indication on how you're supposed to do that. And look, I get it, he's billed as the final boss. You think he's the last boss. On the wall of, like, with their show, like, cave paintings of the bosses, he's the last one. So, he shouldn't be easy. But this was just frustrating and left all three of us stumped. Aiming for the breakable armor was also a pain, but I will say, the way you had to get to the weak spot on his head was actually pretty cool. But overall, this fight highlights a lot of the problems with the controls. If there was a way you could tell where the weak points were before getting near them, it would probably make this a bit easier to figure out. Because from the ground, you have no reason to think crawling down the length of his arm would even do anything.
I did see that he does have a grapple point like under his arm, but that doesn't really tell you that much. But what about the actual final boss though? Yeah, I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce that name. What the fuck is that?
I'll Audernari, I think is how you're supposed to say it. I think. This fight is interesting on paper. You have this big ass flying fire serpent thing that just comes out of fucking nowhere while the world is on fire and you gotta deal with these large fire giants before you even reach the serpent. They do reuse the magic explosive fruit gimmick from Thrall, but here's where things do get a bit annoying. So after you defeat one of the fire giants, you have to climb across his body and hit these switches, which cause the magma that makes up its body to cool, that then opens up a path where you can climb up higher, and then you gotta repeat this a bunch of times. And you gotta keep doing this until you reach the next giant, then kill that giant, and then climb that thing and then get to the next giant, and then once you kill the third one, then you can get to the actual boss. The problem is you have to wait for the magma to cool, as it's not instant. Like, you gotta wait a few seconds after you hit the switch. And after you kill 2 of these giants, it really starts to feel tedious. And getting after the serpent feels like it takes a long time because of all that waiting. But once you reach the serpent, you're repeating the same mechanic. You have to crawl across the rocky bits to switches that then cool magma nearby and reveal the next weak spot. And because of this thing's just the absolute size of this lad, crawling to these switches and then his weak spots takes a while. Thankfully, you don't have to wait as long for the new magma to form, and it's almost instant, so you aren't sitting there for several seconds just waiting for something to happen. They had one neat mechanic for this fight, and I think they overused it. Because the cooling magma thing was novel the first few times you did it, but with how much you're forced to do it in a very short amount of time, it does get old pretty fast. Also, once you finally reach the serpent, there isn't that much of a challenge, but maybe if we hadn't gone around finding a bunch of totems to level up stamina, it would have been tougher, as I think from falling from that height would have just killed you, so that's probably where the main challenge comes in once you're on the serpent.
It definitely looks awesome. And it caught me off guard because I thought that the wolf that was drinking from the pool that was getting bigger and bigger every time you killed a boss, I thought that was going to turn some kind of monster or something that was going to be the final boss, but that completely came out of left field, and it was awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a spectacle than anything else, but that's fine. I mean, it's a final boss, it should have some spectacle to it.
I do like how they completely changed the way the world looks with all the reds and orange and fire, because up until this point it's been a lot of white and blue. Because, you know, we in the ice caps and shit. But the music for this fight is weirdly underwhelming. It just feels like the music we heard for the other bosses already. I mean, it's not bad, but you think for a final boss it'd be a little more intense, I guess, or epic, I guess. I don't know. But overall, I like the fight. I just wish I knew what the hell was going on with the story.
Oh boy, speaking of the plot, Todd really wanted to dig into that and see if he can make some sense of it. Oh, is it time for that? Yep, knock yourself out. Okay, I'm gonna try to take a stab at this. I don't have the full picture of what's going on here. The notes in this game give more insight, but we didn't find all of them. And I tried to look on the wiki to see if they had them all, or at least like a summary. But the wiki is incomplete and doesn't even have all the bosses listed. That surprised me. I was not expecting that. Okay. The opening of the game mentions that the world is in like a permanent winter, and that the isle where this game takes place is a location where divine power used to grow, and people come here to try and fix everything, try and make the weather not shit, but no one ever returns from this place. The prologue mentions Ring the Bells and the name Soul, which I think is your character, Soul I think is your name, but I'm not sure. But you wake up on the shores near a lot of wrecked ships. I guess one of these was yours. The first thing you notice when they show the area this takes place in is there's a lot of these frozen dead giants just everywhere. And the prologue text also mentions ringing the bells, which I think is what the pistons on the gods are supposed to be. And after you defeat the final boss, you ring one last bell and then you get the actual ending. I'm guessing the frozen giants are also gods from previous eras or something, but these ones look far more humanoid than the ones you fight in the game. Why that is, I have no idea. I don't know. The other thing that stuck out to me is what happens when you kill them. They turn to stone. And the game's achievements doesn't say you are killing them either, which is interesting. They say you are releasing them, and each time you kill one, this wolf drags you back to the temple that's called the Revival Temple. There's a pool of some magic liquid stuff. I don't know exactly what it is. And the wolf drinks it and begins to grow larger. And every time you kill one of the gods, you see the wolf get bigger and the pool gets larger each time. So I guess you're releasing that stored up power that was in the bosses beforehand, I guess. And the area also becomes more alive and just really strange. And the temple is clearly guiding you to the next boss in the chain to kill, so there's definitely something going on there. And beneath the temple, there's these 3 giant coffins. I'm not sure what's in them, but they speak to you during certain parts of the game and in the game's ending. I think what you're doing is using that power to revive them somehow. Also, around the temple are these undead-looking women covered in symbols like the gods have right when you kill them. The wiki calls them fallen heroes, and they reanimate when you get near them. If you wander away from them for too long, they tend to just walk around or sit down and do this animation like they're crying or something. I guess these are people who tried and failed to kill the gods and complete the ritual, whatever the ritual actually does. And since they're all women, I'm just gonna assume maybe only women can do this. Maybe that's the implication. And I'm guessing the 3 coffins in the temple just bring people back from the dead, or the energy does, even if you fail. I don't know what exactly is going on, but they will attack you if you get too close to them, and I'm gonna assume it's because they've gone mad and just lost their minds from however long they've been trapped here. I'm also assuming the other reanimated corpses you find were exposed to the same magic, maybe just not as much. That would make sense. I guess they're from another group that tried to kill the gods and failed, and they all appear male, so maybe that's part of the reason why they failed. I don't know if that's the intended implication there. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think they're from the same place you are because they have some vaguely Nordic-looking gear, and the fallen heroes you see at the temple look different. What happens after you beat the thrall is probably the most bizarre. The fire and the giants made of lava do make me think of something. And just bear with me here because it's going to sound a bit weird, but it makes me think of Ragnarok from Norse mythology.
Okay, bro, you lost me. What the fuck?
There's a fire giant in Norse mythology called Surtur, I think that's how you pronounce it. And from what I get in Ragnarok, it says that he is supposed to wage war with the gods, that'd be Thor, Odin, all that shit, and defeat them and then burn the world with fire. The world in the game is on fire, and a bunch of fire giants show up. Not only that, but there's a giant serpent. Oh yeah, that's like Jormungandr, the world serpent, right? If I remember correctly, doesn't that thing fight Thor to the death during Ragnarok? And is one of Loki's kids? And then there's the giant wolf that shows up in Ragnarok that's also Loki's kid, Fenrir. And there's a giant wolf helping you during the final boss. Like, it actually gets you to the final weak spot so you can kill the giant fire snake.
Oh, shit. You might actually be right. And maybe it is a reference to Ragnar. I don't fucking know how you say that, bro.
The other thing that makes me think this whole part of the game is meant to reference Ragnarok is the name that the achievements call this boss. The name Aldernari, I'm probably butchering it, is an old Icelandic word according to the dictionary, and it says it means that it's the name of fire, basically, which I guess is meant to tie it into that Nordic mythology theme, and a lot of the art style references that stuff, and even some of the boss names, like Draki means dragon in Old Norse, so I think this is intentional.
Okay, that's cool and all, but like, what does it mean though? Like, what does this ending mean?
I don't know. I really don't know. There's a giant coiling structure thing made of magic that reaches high as the sky and into the heavens after you defeat the thrall. And I think this is supposed to be a reference to Yggdrasil, the world tree, and I think it's a portal to another realm or something. There's a note you find early on that mentions how the trees in this area are not normal and grow back in a few hours, and that their roots go way deeper than normal than they're supposed to. And the person making the notes thinks they're linked to something deeper underground. So I'm thinking the trees are extensions of the magic tree that we end up creating at the end of the game. And when you activate the final bell, the top of the tree reaches up into some kind of desert world, and something is seen exiting a portal from this tree thing. I'm not sure what it is because we don't see it. We only get a bit of a shadow and it looks vaguely humanoid. It could be you, but I don't know who it is. And after the credits, you look like the other fallen heroes, but your markings are different. The coffins say that as one cycle ends, another begins, meaning that most likely this is not the first time this has happened. It also mentions what you've done can't be forgotten, that it lives on as echoes you can revisit, which is a reference to the fact that you can go back to the bodies of previous bosses and stand in this like energy pool thing, and then you can go back and fight them again. But they also say that our ritual is over, but since they mentioned a cycle, I'm assuming that this is going to happen again, and it's potentially happened multiple times, and that eventually someone else is going to have to come along and fight some new gods that show up here and that absorb the magic power from this place. Yeah, it's, I'm not 100% sure what's going on there. That does make sense. Again, it's kind of vague. Maybe if we found all the notes, it would be easier to understand it. But the echo thing got me thinking that the version of the character that you see at the end of the game that you play as after the game ends is like an echo of the real you. And that the real you or most you was sent to the top of that tree, whatever that is. But one thing I find odd is there's no real mention of the ritual you performed doing anything to actually stop the endless winter or not. Because the world doesn't look that different, but I can chalk that up to that would get really freaking ridiculous and expensive to do. But I'm not sure what to make of that.
So, what does it all mean, though?
I don't know. It's extremely vague. Even more vague than Shadow of the Colossus, in my opinion. Because at least you got like a baseline of what was going on, but there was a lot of questions like, what is Dorman actually? Where did the Colossi initially come from and all that kind of stuff? How did the ancient sword get made? All that stuff. They don't answer any of that. Or what was the girl's cursed fate? That they kind of answer it, but it's not like a hard, definitive answer as to all that stuff. But anyway, but with Shadow of the Colossus, at least you had a baseline, like I said. But this game, there's not really a moment where they explain much. It feels like it's doing like what Amnesia does sometimes, or what games that try to copy Amnesia do, where the entire plot is in notes, and if you miss the notes, you're gonna be confused. But the thing is, the notes are usually missable. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I remember that was my problem with Outlast 2, and I know it's weird talking about a horror game, but Outlast 2 had this problem where most of the important plot stuff was in some of the damn notes that were easy to miss. But maybe we'd have a better understanding if we found all the notes. Because it feels like a game that wanted to leave things as vague as possible so you would fill in the gaps. So like they're trying to create that community that Shadow of the Colossus has, where there's people that have entire channels, Nomad Colossus being one of them, that try to figure out little secrets and little Easter eggs and stuff in the game. Because like, especially Shadow of the Colossus, like I could sit here and talk about that shit all goddamn day if I really wanted to. Especially about some of the unanswered questions in my like attempt to fill in the void, even though I don't think there's a definitive right answer, or at least if there is, the makers of the game aren't gonna tell you. But this video's long enough. I will say, I do appreciate that the story gets me to think about it and to try to piece it together. I do like that, but knowing me, I'm probably dead wrong about most of this, or what's really going on, but no one really seems to be talking about this game's story on YouTube. Even when I typed in ending explain to see if there was some kind of explanation, I couldn't find any videos that had that. Most of them were just people playing the game and being the bosses, and that was it. Most of them with no commentary too. So I'm sure someone will come with a better idea. Maybe someone springboard something off of this, I don't know. Because it really seems like the kind of game for people who love figuring out secrets, or love like piecing things together. Alright, let's wrap this up though.
Okay, so would you recommend this game to people?
Kinda. If you're a fan of Shadow of the Colossus, I would definitely recommend this. But if you're not a fan of Shadow of the Colossus, or you've never played it, or you have played it and you just didn't like it, I can't recommend this game to you. But if you do find Shadow of the Colossus interesting, even if you've never played, maybe you'll watch somebody play or something like that and you want to try it, yeah, I could recommend this. I think the game is both hurt and helped by being similar to and inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, because it does a lot of the elements from that game really well, or pretty well, but then some of the stuff it tries that's different doesn't work. Like the survival mechanics to me don't work all that well. Same for the combat. But I will say this is a very good game considering it's a game made by only 3 people. Like that's the level of polish, I guess, is really good. That's fair. And the mobile difficulty settings does make me want to give this another shot later to see how different the game is on harder settings, or even turning off some of the survival mechanics or cranking them up even just to see what the experience is like. So there's definitely some replay value in that, I guess. And also finding all the notes. I might want to try that at some point just to see if everything is better explained then.
Yeah, maybe. But I do hope more people take a crack at making Shadow of the Colossus style games. You know what I mean? I mean, if Dark Souls could basically start a whole genre or subgenre, depending on how you want to look at it, why can't Shadow of the Colossus do that? Like, I think that'd be pretty awesome.
True. I would love to see that. But as is right now, I'd say it's a strong 7 out of 10, maybe a 7.5. I think the major problem is they need to tweak the controls a bit. I don't know if that can be, I don't know if they're still working on this, because that could be something they patch in, like fixing some of the issues I know with the controls, especially the climbing, because that can get a bit frustrating. The things that drag us down is that combat system with the lesser enemies is not great, but thankfully you don't really have to fight any of those enemies. You can just run past them. It's not game breaking, but if you're kind of on the fence about it, I'd say wait for a sale. But I doubt this video is going to get more people to check out this game because again, like I said, I don't really see too many people talking about this, even when it left early access, and I think that's a bit of a shame. But I do think, like I say, if you like those kind of games, like Shadow Colossus and stuff like that, you've probably already bought it, let's be real. But if you haven't, like I said, give it a shot. And if you're still on the fence about it, wait for sale. I mean, it's Steam, it's gonna be a sale at some point. Yeah, true.